Hello everyone. I'm going to present to you the notion of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain. What we're going to try and do in this session is give you an overview of Bitcoin and how it works in detail. Now I must preface this by saying that I am not a technical expert. I am a lawyer. So if you are coming from a technical side, there may be a sparsity of detail around it. But I'm trying really to convey the general notions here so that people can appreciate why Bitcoin is so different and why people are so interested in this particular sector. And what the offshoot of Bitcoin, which is blockchain, represents as a result and where that came from. It's important to look at it from this perspective because if you don't understand its originality, then you may decide to treat it in the same way as other conventional financial systems, which is not how it should be treated because it is very much like apples and pears. It is not the same, and it really signals a departure away from traditional financial systems as we understand them. At least that's the case for Bitcoin. So the first thing is that Bitcoin essentially is a payment system. It is a decentralized payment system. Now, best way of thinking about it is PayPal, but without a company behind it issuing or administering that payment system. There's no one behind it. There's a network behind it, but no particular person or company responsible for it. Now, it's invented by Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who he or she is. Released in the late noughties, so about 2009. Now, why did Satoshi want to go on and create this system? Well, from Satoshi's perspective, the current payment system's overall cost was very high, and the instruments used within those payment systems were not equipped. So for instance, if we take a bank card is for an in-person transaction or it's to be used in an ATM. Because with both of those transactions, you insert the card and put in a PIN, generally speaking. And that creates the two-factor authentication and mitigates any fraud. However, online, if you use a bank card, you can do to make a transaction. Therefore, it's a very fragile payment instrument, at least for online payments. Because anyone can just lift the card details from you and then simply go online and make payments. And so the prevalence of fraud within the current financial payment system and payment systems is massive, colossal. And therefore, the role of banks and intermediaries is to resolve and deal with the liability caused by those causes of fraud. But what if you could address the actual causes as opposed to the symptoms? And that's to an extent what Bitcoin is trying to do. Because if you have a convoluted, heavy administrative financial payment system, then those costs of administering the payment system have to go somewhere, and they will inevitably fall on the shoulders of the merchants and then subsequently the users. So Satoshi's view was fairly simple in that regard. It was to say we can reduce the overall cost of these financial systems using a different way, different payment network. So if we expound those aims, it was to have a cheaper, but yet extremely secure, accessible, so anyone can access the payment network that is Bitcoin today. Not everyone can access Visa. Not everyone can access SWIFT in terms of financial institutions. And a seamless manner to make remote payments. Seamless in the sense that the payments are always peer-to-peer. They do not route through intermediaries of any sort within Bitcoin. So it's very streamlined, the process. Now, there have been instances similar to Bitcoin in the past. One of them is eGold, as an unregulated payment system. Yet with eGold, there was a central administrator of the payment system, someone that was responsible for the value behind the electronic gold tokens created. And that created a problem, inevitably, because of this single point of failure. And also, having that single person there, it comes back to them providing a service, which means it creates cost, and that cost now needs to be borne by the payment system. And PayPal, well, PayPal is a payment system of sorts, but is a centralized electronic money system. They are the issuer of electronic money. You put £10 with them, they give you £10 in electronic money to spend online. But also, they administer that payment system. So you have to ask permission from PayPal to send funds to somewhere else. And if there is a dispute, they are involved in the dispute resolution process. So what is a decentralized payment system, which is effectively Bitcoin? Well, there are two fundamental attributes. One is there is no central issuer of the tokens used within the system, the value transacted. And there is no central administrator for this payment network. So those two fundamental differences with other conventional payment networks. Now, to achieve this decentralized payment system, Satoshi needed to devise a token that has inherent value. Now, when we think of money, we always think of money as a credit instrument of sorts. Money issued by the central bank is in the form of a promissory note, paper note, which is the person who is the bearer of this particular paper note can take it to the central bank and they will redeem it for what was in the previously gold, but now it's circular, so you just redeem it for itself. A private bank provides credit in the form of an electronic balance. When you make a deposit with a private bank, credit institution, they give you an electronic balance, but that is a credit balance. They owe you that money. And PayPal, they're doing very much the same as what banks do. They receive them funds and they give a credit in relation to that balance. Obviously, they can't go out and lend the money as an electronic money institution, but in essence, it's a credit digital asset, digital token. Bitcoin, however, has value in itself. It is not any type of credit. It is like transacting with gold online, but literally gold. Now, why is that important? It's important for this design of a decentralized payment system because as a result, you no longer need an issuer of electronic tokens in that payment system. Everyone just has Bitcoin and uses this digital asset that has inherent value. So with that, the implication of it is when you have Bitcoin in a wallet, it is very much the same as having gold in your own personal vault. If you lose the passcode for your vault or the passcode to unlock your wallet, then those assets are gone forever. So it's this tangibility of the asset and the fact that you directly control it that differentiates Bitcoin from other electronic payment systems. But it's a necessity in order for the design of the decentralized payment system to be complete. And part of that design is an incentive structure within Bitcoin where people are paid in Bitcoin within the system, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a bit. And as we've already stated, there is no dependency on any one individual, which results in the payment system having a lower aggregate cost. Now, a really important element of this is that Satoshi made it such that no one in particular owns the Bitcoin payment system by default. In fact, everyone who joins the network has an equal stake, control, or ownership of the Bitcoin network. It is a pure democratized financial system. And that, again, is necessary in order to design this decentralized payment system. No one can own the payment system. It has to be owned by everyone within the network. So then the critical question is, that's fine, you can say, well, we're going to have a digital asset that has inherent value, so there's no central issuer. Fine, you want to democratize the network by saying everyone owns essentially the network, or no one owns it in particular. But who's going to do the work within this payment network? Who is going to take the liability to ensure that things are done? It's kind of like running a co-op. Who's going to do the jobs in this co-op, and who's going to make sure that jobs get done? So Visa takes the liability on. It says, look, you banks can rely upon us to relay messages from POS devices, hardware devices, to the issuing bank to verify the balance of customers, and then to the acquiring bank to say, yes, okay, go ahead and make the settlement. You can rely upon us to do that job, and that is the job of Visa as a central administrator of its network. Whereas with Bitcoin, there's no one person responsible for that job of relaying the messages. Yet, quite amazingly, it works. And it works probably as well as Visa does. It may not be as fast as Visa, but it works. It is as accurate as Visa to a certain degree. So how on earth did Satoshi work this out? He worked on the premise that he could crowdsource these administrative functions to everyone within the network, like a tendering process for jobs. Yet, he made sure that in that tendering process, that there wouldn't be any differentiator between the quality of work, that the quality of the work would always be the same, and that it would perform a very primary function of simply securing the network. It's not like, Satoshi is saying, yes, we'll give one particular job to this person to relay the messages and another particular job to someone else, Joe Bloggs, to do the settlements. Not that. It's not a division of labour. Everyone performs exactly the same function to administer this network. But it's crowdsourced. So, let's go into this in a bit more detail. There are a couple of, premises that need to be dealt with in order to be able to understand this notion of crowdsourcing out transaction processing. So the first thing is, Satoshi says that all transactions in the Bitcoin network should be public. Now, that is not to say that people are publishing their bank statements online and everyone can see how much everyone owns. No, because in Bitcoin, no one knows each other in the Bitcoin network. All there is in Bitcoin, all there are in Bitcoin are usernames. So you have usernames in Bitcoin and balances associated with those usernames. But those usernames are not people's names. They're just, strings of numbers and letters. But those usernames have associated balances with them, and those usernames participate in this transaction network. But all of those transactions are public for everyone to see in the network. So if you work on that premise of transparency, then everyone in the network has downloaded these chains of transactions. And that's the important point here, that every single transaction in Bitcoin is linked together. So think of it as this giant serpent from the beginning of 2009 to now, and there's only one version of it. And so this chain of transaction through time is on, I think there were 5,000 peers in the network, on 5,000 people's computers. They all have identical blockchains. They're called chains of transactions. And they are all publicly available. So there is one singular version of the payment system's history. It is downloaded by everyone within the network, and it is public for everyone to see. So those are some of the elements, if you want, that allows for this crowdsourcing of transaction processing. So why is that important? It's important because if everyone has access to the transaction chain in history, then those people can identify anomalies with transactions being proposed to be added onto the transaction chain. So they can participate in this vetting process, at least notionally. Now let's go into detail about what exactly those peers in the network are doing. So the way it works is anyone in the network can add a transaction. So I can go onto my wallet, you can see the example there, and initiate a transaction from one user account to another user account. But it will be unconfirmed. Meaning if I am selling goods and someone sends me Bitcoin, I should never send the goods until that transaction has been confirmed. And in the Bitcoin protocol, there are rules around how that confirmation process takes place. So the way it works is as follows. I initiate a transaction, it is broadcast to the whole peer network in Bitcoin. And it sits in a pool. And in this pool, it's the unconfirmed transaction pool. And it sits there until it is being approved by the peers in the network. So how does it get approved by the peers in the network? And this is the crowdsourcing part. So the way it works is that Satoshi, he devised a prize competition, if you will, to simplify things. And in that prize competition, Satoshi is stating that if you go in, collect some of those unconfirmed transactions, and expend efforts in relation to those unconfirmed transactions, then you may be entitled to a prize, and that prize is more Bitcoins. Now, no one is actually there standing on the sidelines with a prize handing out the Bitcoins. It is designed within the rules of the protocol. So how does that prize competition actually work? Think of it like this. No one is sitting there crunching, numbers in relation to doing transaction processing, moving, debits into credits and things like that. No one is doing any accounting in the Bitcoin system. There aren't any accountants who are, required to sit there and do the transaction processing, move A to B, and reconcile accounts. Forget that. It has got nothing to do with it. If that was the case, Bitcoin would not work, because then you would have to assess the quality of the work being crowdsourced. Whereas with Bitcoin, the quality is identical, and the way they deal with it is through this strange short game, which I'm going to describe now. So think of this, a huge casino, a massive casino. Maybe the casino is the size of, London, and within that casino, there are roulette tables all over the city. And miners, so peers in the network that want to participate in this prize competition, they're called miners. They have approximately around 20 roulette tables each. Okay? And the miners, what they do is they spin simultaneously all 20 roulette tables at the same time, and they bet on the number 0 for all 20 of those roulette tables. And every one of those miners in the whole of the casino, the size of London, is doing exactly the same thing. Now, the prize works this way. Is that whoever gets, and this is crazy, 20 number 0s on their 20 tables from one spin wins the prize, in effect. Now, I'm simplifying things, but it's to give you a notion. If you were to go into a casino and spin the wheel and select the number 0 and place your bets on that, I would say that that's probably, I'm no gambler, but I would say that that's quite a tough bet. It's probably a high statistical improbability that you'll get the prize. However, if you were to spin 20 tables and for the prize only to be linked to 20 tables, and that you would have to get 20 zeros for all of those tables, then you're going beyond the realms of statistical improbability to almost impossibility. And it's that competition that makes it incredible for Bitcoin, because you actually do have people involved in this process of essentially gambling with their resources to get those 20 zeros or more zeros. And so the prize must be very good. And the prize is Bitcoins, effectively. Once you are the winner, in the casino the size of London, then everyone in London will know that you've won the prize, because you'll declare it. And through a certain means, mathematical means, they'll be able to actually verify that you didn't rig the results. And so when everyone sees, oh, this guy has got 20 zeros from their roulette tables, that miner can take a packet of unconfirmed transactions, and they can add their own prize into that packet. So 10 or more Bitcoins into that prize. It is getting lower and lower over time, because there's a deflationary supply of Bitcoin. There's a deflationary supply of Bitcoins. And they can add their own prize into this block, this packet. And once they've added these unconfirmed transactions in the block, and they've demonstrated that they've won the prize through getting the 20 zeros, they can now add that block onto the last block in the blockchain. And at that point, history changes. And everyone in the network, even the peers in the network that didn't choose to gamble in this mining activity, they will receive this message that a new block has been added to the blockchain. And when they receive this message, they will automatically update their version of the blockchain. And it is at that point, when everyone in the network has updated their version of history, that the unconfirmed transactions in that pool become confirmed. And that is how the decentralized payment system works. It is complete madness if you were to describe it, to someone that's used to conventional payment system. But the fact is, it works, and it is secure, and an unbelievable security. If you think about it, if you were to characterize the amount of energy that goes into these mining games, they say that approximately the energy involved, the energy used in Ireland is used within the Bitcoin network for mining. So that is a massive amount of resource that goes behind the Bitcoin network simply to do one thing, which is to ensure that there is only one version of history and that there's only one blockchain that every peer in the network has. And that's how the confirmation process works. So then we talk about, why this is interesting also. It's interesting because the Bitcoin network is an extremely resilient network. There is no central issuer, there is no central administrator for this payment system. It is administered amongst the peers. But it's not like people are discussing the administration of how they should, confirm transactions, move ledger entries from left to right or whatever, credits to debits, or, no one is in a professional manner involved in maintaining the Bitcoin network, not in terms of how the decentralized payment system actually functions. No, it is all automated, just machines working away. So this resilience in the network, this 5,000 peers in the network, means that it's almost impossible to change the transaction history in Bitcoin, to revert it back to square one in 2009. However, if you have more than 50% of the roulette tables in the casino the size of London, then you may be able to change history moving forwards, but not before. So let's take a step back from all of this and take a more holistic view on Bitcoin and it in context. Well, barter was the first decentralized payment system, and it was based on physical assets, a sheep for a dog or a sheep for a pot of wine or whatever. But it was not certainly a divisible mechanism for trade. And that's why money was essentially created in the form of, for example, gold, which was a divisible physical object. Bitcoin is the first remote decentralized payment system, like barter in essence, because you're transacting with assets and not credits. But it is divisible, unlike barter, and it is fungible, unlike barter. Now, let's make an assessment of whether Satoshi achieved its aims. First aim for Satoshi was reducing in aggregate the cost of running a payment system. So removing those financial intermediaries from the system, which create a lot of cost for everyone. And all of that cost trickles down to the users of the payment system. Well, the cost of using Bitcoin for the users, i.e. people who want to transact, is negligible. Now, let's look at access. Access to a bank card is very difficult. You need to prove your identity, etc. There needs to be some form of validation before you can enter into that financial system. Whereas with Bitcoin, there is no validation. Anyone can enter into the payment system. It's direct access. So, obviously there are good and there are bad sides to it. You could say, that means that criminals can enter into it. But it also means that the disenchanted or the people who don't have access to normal conventional financial systems can have access to this system. And it is secure. It is so secure. It is more secure than many banks to a certain degree in terms of its reliability. It has proven itself since 2009. Still no one has brought down the Bitcoin protocol. So then the funny thing is when you invent something, the immediate thing that people will do is when they look at this invention and they marvel at it, is they'll think, well, how else can we use this invention? And, well, the invention of Bitcoin is this shared record system, no one owning the database, and yet it being secure and there's no central point failure. So how could you use those characteristics in other ways? When people started looking at Bitcoin in a bit more detail around 2014, they said, well, actually, Bitcoin is an asset, it's not a credit. So really the Bitcoin payment system is an asset registry of sorts. It's a dynamic asset registry because as people want to move assets, it actually, within the registry itself, it updates itself in a secure manner. So they thought, well, what else can we put in the asset registry? Can we put shares in the asset registry? That it functions in the same way as Bitcoin. Can we put bonds in this asset registry? Can we even put land titles or vehicles or machines or products into this registry system? And that's what they're doing now. And this is what I would refer to as the Cambrian explosion event that's happened since Bitcoin. And many other digital currencies of many different forms, with many different protocols, all stemming from this amazing success story that is Bitcoin. And then on the other side of the equation, you had acute financial professionals looking at Bitcoin and then looking at the current financial system, especially banking, and thinking, my goodness, this paradigm within Bitcoin, the most valuable thing within this paradigm is the fact that everyone shares the same version of history. Everyone shares the same ledger, in essence, in Bitcoin. And if you look at a bank is in this constant process of reconciling ledgers with other banks and even with the regulators. And that process of reconciliation involving accounting professionals, financial professionals, actuaries, and all sorts of liability intermediaries are involved in that process. So where Bitcoin, Satoshi was looking at the payment system and saying there's too many intermediaries, some people are looking at the notion of a shared ledger that was invented in Bitcoin and saying, can that be passed over to the banking system that has too many intermediaries, and let's cut all of that cost out. And that's being done now, and these are not small ventures, these are highly capitalized ventures with consortiums of banks, etc. But it was a few people in the beginning that just simply looked at Bitcoin and said, this is an amazing thing, let's do something with it. One of which is Richard Brown, who I know very well from London, who came up with this notion and the language around the shared ledger. And then there were other people who took a completely different strand. And it has led to the most incredible amount of innovation since. So let's just go back to this point, which is once the transactions have been put in a packet and the miner has got the requisite amounts of zeros and proved to everyone in the casino that they are the winner, and they've added their block onto the last block in history, and then that block is broadcast to the peers in the network. When those other peers in the network receive the broadcast of that block, they update their record of history, their version of the blockchain, which is identical across those 5,000 peers. But they update it in an automated fashion. It means that the language in the transaction from Bitcoin is move 5 Bitcoins from user A to user B. It's an instruction, a payment instruction. Someone has to execute that payment instruction onto the ledger. And that happens at the last leg of the journey, when that block has been added and the other peers in the network receive it onto their Bitcoin software. And when they receive it, that software is, if you want, triggered. Those instructions are triggered and executed, just like computer code. triggered onto that ledger. It moves in that person's ledger the asset from A to B in that person's ledger, and does it in all 5,000 ledgers. And so someone came up with the notion, very young chap, Vitalik Buterin, of what else could you do, just with this bit of software. Can you ask that particular computer to do many other different things, apart from just simply move A to B? Can you get it to run computer code? Can you get it to do more than just A to B, but hold the funds in escrow and then pay them later, or do something if someone asks for it? Whatever computer code does. And that is the notion of the smart contract and distributed computing that you may be hearing about. That is an offshoot of Bitcoin. It existed before as a notion, but it's come to life in the context of Bitcoin because of this notion of a blockchain that is shared amongst peers. So, conclusion. Bitcoin is the success case for a global peer-to-peer controlled and administered financial system. And blockchain, this shared ledger that everyone has stored on their own computer, is the byproduct of Bitcoin. And the mechanisms for achieving a single version of history, which everyone shares, is the consensus system. And the blockchain and consensus system can together actually transform the world as we know it. How can he do it? People are looking, as I said, in many different ways. Asset registries, machines being registered on systems, distributed computing, and all the rest of it. The world is your oyster with blockchain and its possibilities. For instance, I'm part of a group that are leveraging IoT and blockchain and solar renewable energy. So creating a distributed computing program that can distribute rewards to people that are producing solar energy, but not to have any middlemen reviewing the paperwork, but to have a distributed application that just does that. So this is, the main thing here that I wanted to convey. So coming back to the introduction, I wanted to give you an overview of the whole of Bitcoin. As I said, I'm not a technical professional, I'm a legal professional, so I may be sparse on certain technical details. And please do correct me if I'm wrong about the concepts. But the key here is, why is this so different? And why are people so interested? And why has it created this Cambrian explosion of blockchain and all the rest of it? And therefore, if you look at it and understand and appreciate the originality of this system, you'll know, if you are a regulator, how to treat it. You should not be treating it as a conventional payment system. You should be treating it how it is, which is fundamentally different to anything we have ever seen. Thank you very much.